In this unit, we will learn how to cut and merge objects. More specifically, how to group, cut, or hide them temporarily or permanently. So let me show you. First thing we're gonna check is how to group and ungroup our objects. Most of the times, you're gonna have some illustrations that they consist of a group of shapes, and most likely, if you want to move them, you want to move some of them together at the same time, rather than each of them specifically, or even scale them or rotate them. One way is to go ahead and select the objects, and for example in this case also the shadow, and move it around and rotate it and so on. But this is a bit of a pain if every time you have to select all of them one by one. What you can actually do is to group them. One way is to just right click and then group, or go to object and then group. They are already grouped at the moment, that's why the option of grouping is grayed out. If I'm gonna click anywhere on this object, you will see that it selects all 4 objects at the same time, and I can further edit them as I would like to. You can of course create another group on top of this group by selecting more of the objects. So if I want to group all of the objects together, I'm gonna select all of them and then go to object and group. And now I move all the composition at the same time, as well as I can scale it and I can rotate it and so on. If I'm now finished with my editing, I can just ungroup it by right click and then select ungroup, or just by going to object and ungroup them. And you will see that I have the Doritos by themselves and the burrito is still one group. I didn't ungroup it yet. So what happens in case that I don't want to ungroup it, but I want to just select this red shape individually? What you can do is double click on your group, and it will get you in this isolation mode where everything is a bit faded except from the objects that they are part of the group that you are looking at. You can see that you are in this isolation mode from the top bar here, when you can see it says group. So you're on the layer 1 and within the group. Now I can select the object and move it individually without mistakenly changing any of the other objects behind. Once I'm happy, I can either click on the little arrow so I can go back one level, or I can just double click anywhere within my canvas. The reason why it was just one level because we had just one group. So if I'm gonna go ahead and group again all of the objects together, if I'm gonna double click to get within the group, I'll have everything but the background shape. But you see how still these shapes are a group because it's a group within a group. And if I want to get even farther and go within this group, I double click again to do so. I can click here to go one group out, so I'm back here, or the arrow to get back into initial composition. Grouping the objects is really helpful in order to move them around or scale them and rotate it, so any kind of transformation, as well as to be able to easily select them. Especially when you have later on, you will see having like complicated compositions with different shapes as well, the background, and it's gonna get harder to click individually on each of the shapes in order to select it. I'm gonna go ahead now and ungroup them. I'm gonna go and select also the burrito and ungroup it as well, and having back again my shapes individually. So grouping and ungrouping is a function that you will use quite often, so you most likely need also to know the shortcut. And the shortcut is just Command G letter on your keyboard, or if you're working on Windows, it would be Control and G letter. Let's go now through some different kind of options which allow you to cut one object from the other. I'm gonna go ahead and move this to Doritos a bit outside the canvas. I'm gonna remove the shadow, and I'm gonna scale my burrito here, and I'm gonna clone it multiple times so I can show you the different options. As we said on the previous session, in order to duplicate it, you just use the Alt key or Ctrl D to duplicate the objects on the same distances. If I want to start and cut, let's say, the bun, the bread from the fillings, then I need to use a kind of a function, which you will find on the right side here on the Pathfinder. But if you don't really see the icon of the Pathfinder, as I do at the moment, you can find it under the Window menu. If you go to Window and then select Pathfinder, it's gonna pop you up the corresponding panel. We have a few different options going on here. You can kind of understand from the icon what does each of them. The first one, it unites the shapes. It merges them. If you hover over, you will get also some further information about them. I'm gonna go ahead and select the burrito and click on the first icon. And you will see how it merges the filling along with the burrito itself. The second icon crops the front shape from the one at the back. We just remained with the filling. And then the next one is keeping only the areas that they have in common. And you see this is a selection of the filling and this is a selection of the burrito itself. So if we use the third icon, it's gonna keep only the area that they had in common. The last icon on this line here, it does exactly the opposite. It keeps all the areas that they don't have in common. Few more options. Let's get rid of the first line and duplicate again our burritos using the Alt key in order to create the clone while dragging my selection. Selecting the first two icons and clicking the first icon which says divide. What it does is actually dividing the objects based on the lines that define the edges of them. They work like a group at the moment, so what I need to do first is to ungroup them. You can see now how it divided it in 3 parts. The second icon on the bottom row, it's the trim icon. And what it does is cutting the shapes, the front from the back. Let's have a look if I'm ungrouping them. You can see now I have the bread by itself and then the filling by itself too. The next one is the merge tool. And what it does is actually merging the 2 shapes. Again, I will need to ungroup them to see the result. It merges them, meaning that it creates one object out of them and it gets rid of all the parts that you don't need. For example, like before, it was somehow like this. So we don't really need all this part here within the yellow shape, yeah? So we got rid of that. The next icon is keeping the area that they have in common plus from the front shape the outline of the rest of the shape. Next one is just creates the outlines of the shapes. And the last one is cropping from the one at the back the area that is not in common with the front shape. All these Pathfinder options are pretty handy because they allow you to divide your objects or even crop one from the other and so on. And we are going to see later on also in the practical phase how you can put these options of cropping your shapes into practice. Another interesting tool that I wanted to talk to you about is the eraser tool. I'm going to go ahead and grab here my Doritos and snap my Pathfinder panel here on the side. I'm going to also leave the align and the transform just in case we need them later. Anytime you have struggled finding them, feel free to navigate under the window panel in order to access them. Let's divide the Doritos. I'm gonna let's clone them so I have 4 of them. And I'm gonna scale them a bit down so they all fit on the canvas here. The first tool that I want to talk to you about is the eraser tool. You just click on that and it allows you to select the object that you want to erase parts of and go with your eraser and just erase parts. And here we go, our little tortilla is bitten. If you double click on your eraser tool, you can define the angle of it or the roundness, so if you want it perfect circle or not, as well as the size. Once you're happy with the adjustments, you just press OK, and again, you can just apply the eraser by hovering over your shape. Another tool is the scissors tool. You can access it by holding down your click on the eraser tool and selecting the scissors tool. What it does is allowing you to go over any path and click and divide the path. And you can see that it's been divided if you use your white arrow, click on the anchor point and move it farther away. You see that the path now is not closed anymore. And this is really handy if you want to divide your path in order to amend it. And you can also click even on the existing anchor points to divide them. And here we go. The shape is divided. In order to remove anchor points like this one, you just select it and press backspace or delete button. And with my pen tool, if I want, I can go ahead and connect again the path with little carves so it looks like it's missing a part. The last tool of this series is the knife tool. And as you can imagine, it allows you to cut your shape. So just draw lines and it cuts the shape. And now if I'm going to use the white arrow and select the parts, I can see how exactly I cut them. All these tools are really handy and they are allowing you to amend the shapes that you already have in order to create any other shapes required, so any kind of illustrations that you want to achieve. The last tool that I wanted to show you is the clipping mask. Quickly went back to our initial illustration and I'm gonna group all the assets together. So select all of them and then right click and group. We have this option that it allows you not to just crop a part of your illustration, but just hide it temporarily. Let's say that we actually want to zoom in and just show like a part of our illustration, like this part here. One way would be to zoom out of our canvas and scale our illustration up and just focus on that area there. But what happens in case that, we want to have this area and another detail and so on? In this case, we just need to temporarily hide them. So I'm gonna leave that burrito on the left side here and create a clone on the right. I'm gonna create another shape, a rectangle, a little square, which I'm gonna use as my window. And by window, what I mean? In Illustrator, you can create some masks. And these masks are allowing you to hide parts and reveal others. It works more like as a real frame. So you have the frame and you have the picture within it. If you move the frame, you see different crops of the picture behind. Or you can also move the picture behind and you can see different crops of that. So imagine that this square here is our frame and this is our picture that we want to put in the frame. So what I'm gonna do is select both the pictures, the burrito and the tortillas, and the frame itself. And then go to Object and then Clipping Mask and Make. And you see that it temporarily hides everything that's outside the frame. And of course I can move the frame and so on. Or I can just double click on that and be able to access the illustration. But then if I double click again, I will be able to see the full illustration. And you can see here from the isolation mode at the top again that you can see where you are. So I'm within the clipping mask and within the group. Double clicking anywhere outside in order to get out of that. The reason why you need to access it is perhaps you just want to reposition your picture within the frame, or you just want to amend the illustration itself. Another thing that you can do now, for example, is scale it a bit down and create a clone of that. So I'm holding the Alt key down to duplicate it, double click in order to do another crop. So especially if you're designing something that you want to show the full illustration as well as some details, this is a really handy tool. So you create the full illustration and then you just create some little crops by using the clipping mask. I'm just creating a few crops to show the details of this burrito illustration, yeah? Let's do another one with the burrito itself. And yeah, job done, nice and easily. Perhaps what we need now in this composition is to also color what is behind the clipping mask, right? It feels a bit lost that it's not like a nice cube. So I'm gonna go ahead and draw another shape, another square, paint it white, and I'm gonna send it back. So arrange and send back, and select it with my clipping mask, arrange, and then bring to front. Perhaps, yeah, the white doesn't work that well, so I'm gonna go ahead and switch it to black perhaps. Yeah, that feels better. I'm gonna do the same also for the rest of my illustrations. I'm gonna create one square there and another one here, and then select both and right click, arrange, send backward. Right click, arrange, send to back, and select all of them, right click, arrange, bring to front. It often happens that you create like bigger illustrations and you just want to use crops of them for different applications. So clipping masks allow you to hide parts of graphics while revealing others. In the next unit, let's learn how to align our objects.